excites me, as I'm drinking, I gotta tell you, my Toronto soda. So
Well,
like
I don't know
Toronto,
what that is.
it's like the syrup. It's a peach flavored sugar free syrup. I
Okay.
think there's something real in it. I'm not sure what the real thing would be. I think it's all chemical probably, but
There might be stevia. Like, I don't know,
there is
there's
stevia.
definitely flavors and some things out there that feel like they come from something natural. I just don't know enough about, I just don't know enough. That's why I'm out there looking for experts, right?
Well, and that's a very sweet approach, right? Because th- to not mock me for, I was like, as I was preparing, I was like, I really want this, like it's like an Italian soda. It's the syrup, and then like I just do a regular soda. I'm like, oh, this is like awful to drink right now as I'm talking to Sherry about the flavor remedy and natural living flavors. But I want to go back. I want to take it back to the top. You just said we were talking just now, and you're like, growing older, is a gift. You get wisdom, all these things. So for you, the notion of growth, this is why you're one of my favorite peoples ever, is because like you're not someone who set out like like for you when you were like 5, like so that's what 23 years ago,
Something like that.
something like that in
Close.
there, right? You're not someone that set out when you were a kid. You're like, I know exactly what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna educate the world on how living flavor can heal the world. That wasn't your thing, right?
Oh God, no.
What was it back then? Like, I'm so curious. Take me back to like little Sherry. Like, take me back. What did it look like in the beginning? Like, what was the drive? What was the ambition? Because it
you
took you
know,
a world to find it.
yeah, and it took me forever. And it's funny, like back then, I never, we talked about this a little bit in the origin story, which just happened to release today, which is pretty awesome. Um, I never had like this clear drive, right? And I always envied people that were like, and they knew what they wanted to be from the day that they grew up. My son's dad is like that, knew what he wanted to be from the moment he had a choice to choose a career, right? And I'm always like, wow, that's like amazing how you just choose a path and you go and you succeed amazingly. For me, there's lots and lots of pieces. I think as a child, what I loved, so one of the things I loved playing, and it's always fascinating to go back and look at people's childhood, I loved playing teacher. So that was always my thing. Like if I could recycle one of my favorite teachers' old workbooks back in the days of paper workbooks, I'd be like, oh my God, now I'm like a real teacher, right? And I wanted a chalkboard and I wanted to do the teaching thing. I also remember a phase where I wanted to be an oceanographer. Like I did a report on dolphins and I was like, wow, I wanted to just, save the oceans, I guess, at that point. Artist, there was a little bit of artist and definitely writer. I loved like writing stories. I always got, and of course, just by my nature, I only do things that I know I'm good at. So if somebody told me I was good at something, I'd be like, okay, I like doing this. And that's where writing stories kind of came in. Like my second grade teacher would put stars on my paper and hang them up. And, so all of a sudden I'm a story writer. So it is interesting to look back at your childhood, but like, yeah, I'm many decades in before I'm finally getting to this place where I'm like, okay, this finally looks like a path that all the pieces that seemed disconnected in my life are finally coming together in this kind of seemingly, perfect.
And it's I find that people that experience that that moment where it all clicks together is so momentous, but like it's sheer horror
Oh my God, yeah.
until that point, right?
Oh, for sure. And still, it's still sheer horror. And it probably will be for the rest of the whole duration of it, right? Like, and I don't know anything about people that like want to be in the spotlight and want to, I don't really understand. I get it, but that's not who I am. And that's why sometimes I'm like, it's like instant fear the second I launch something. And yet I've had to kind of come to this place where I'm like, the message is bigger than me, right? I have to be the messenger because so far I haven't seen anyone else who's talking about it the way I'm talking about it. So it just, you got to get over yourself and just put it out there, right?
I want to address that too, actually, and we're gonna dive into a lot of these things, but we're just throwing them out on the table right now. I I love the way you talk about it, and we've been working on your podcast and everything, but like the past year of getting to know you and working with you, it's been really cool to see how you talk about things, and it's not the way that we think. It's not like everyone has a flag now, and I just saw a documentary about this last night about comedians, how in this documentary they're saying that like people on the far left have actually been in a way No, I mean, the thesis of this film is people on the, like, people extremists on the left are actually creating more of a fascist society by blocking free speech. So it's actually, it's not the conservatives, it's the far liberals that are like, um, that's offensive, that's offensive, that's offensive, everything's offensive, you know? And so in a way, I think that has made certain people kind of recoil and go, oh, I don't want to say anything, I don't want to put myself out there, because, and I get this with a lot of clients, they're terrified to launch anything where they're using their voice, because they're like, I'm going to offend someone, and all I'm
Right.
talking about is how to be a positive parent.
It's very true. You know, we talked about this. I mean, we almost launched the first episode around the whole polarization of the country and kind of backed off of that. But it's very true about where we are in society. And I appreciate you saying, you know, that you enjoyed our conversations around this, because it's so important. And this is where I think we fail as a society, is we get so ingrained in being right, right? And this is how we get fed media, and this is how we get fed information, and this is how, you know, artificial intelligence recognizes what we click on and feeds us more. And then the further you go down that rabbit hole, the less you understand the other side, right? And I saw that with COVID too, like people that I used to follow and be like completely on board with, and all of a sudden they're going down this path that I didn't expect. And I think that's what happened, you know, in a lot of different conversations, in families, in, you know, social media, in choices in politics. Like if this doesn't create, you know, if what we've been through doesn't create a breakdown of even our political sides, right? Like so much needs to be broken down and rebuilt, but we can't do that until we are willing to have uncomfortable conversations about the things that are opposite of what you feel ingrained in, right?
Yeah, it's so funny. We've seen this in the past, like, many years now, but, like, you know, and again, it's not just to say, oh, that side is wrong, that side is right. It's that I can't tolerate sometimes. Like, I go to people that I know, like, I'll go on Facebook pages for people that I know that think politically different than I do. And I'm so curious. I'm like, how are we both looking at the same thing and seeing
Yes,
such different perspectives, right? Or we have
it's
such
very
different takes.
true.
And yet, what I catch myself doing is going, at no point am I judging or questioning the way I see things.
Right, right.
How do they see it that way? And I'm like,
Right,
you fucking hypocrite, right?
right,
Like,
right. That's so brilliant. And that's what we need, right? We need to let go of this need to feel right. And
yeah,
there's, you know, clearly elements about what you believe in that resonates with you. And, you know, it's not like you have to let go of that, but you do need to ask yourself why you're so attached to it, or um, you know, why is it so strong? And a lot of times it's personal stories, right? But it's also a lot of times, um, I think what we're being fed, right? What's being twisted into a completely opposing view. And I've told you this before, you know, my household is completely, you know, we don't really feel like we pick political sides, but because we've been able to break down the barriers enough to see that we are aligned on our values and what we want and how we care about people and how we care about, you know, financial fiscal responsibilities. It's like there's this predetermined, and this is not just in politics, right? This is in all things. This predetermined idea of what's right makes you think that if you are not in that same category, then you must be one of those evil people, right? Or whatever. And it's true for everything. And I've told you this before, you know, stepping into the idea of food and the politics of food and the, you know, the different views of availability, like food deserts and food availability and nutrition availability and corporate and capitalism. Like it's all political, it's all, and political, it's all, what's the word I'm looking for, polarized, right?
polarized. Yeah.
So it makes it scary for me to speak up, just like you said, people that want to speak up about something that feels so important, and yet you're ready for the banana man to attack any minute, right? Like he's just there. Somebody's going to start pointing their finger at you, and you have to be ready for it in these days.
And that's like, I know, oh, you brought it back full circle. Like, I, that's the thing, right? So you deal with something that in many ways is much more emotional. I was watching a trailer for the movie. I think it's Running Scared. Maybe no, it's Midnight Express. No, it's with Robert De Niro and Charles Grodin from the '80s. And there's a scene where Charles Grodin, he's a criminal, and then Robert De Niro is tasked with bringing him across the country to take him to justice or something. And they're on a train, they're traveling. It's like a buddy travel movie, and Charles Grodin is a vegetarian, and he's just sitting there seething while Robert De Niro's, forking and knife, like just cutting apart a big steak, right? And Charles Grodin's character is like, "Why? That's disgusting. Why are you putting that in your body?" And Robert De Niro does the standard, because it tastes good.
Right.
That's a
That's
horrible
awesome.
Robert De Niro.
I need to like take that clip and do a whole episode on it, because there's such juiciness in that. Right?
But do you see the polarization, right?
Oh, for sure.
Vegetarians are this kind of person. I used to be a vegetarian for 11 years, and people were always like so curious about, like, can you eat this? My daughter now, I'm dairy free, gluten free. My daughter's like, can you have today? I was picking her up for school, and they had cashew pieces. And I love cashews, and so she's like, "Can you eat this, Dada?" I was like, "What the fuck? Yeah, I can eat." Like, I didn't say what the fuck. She's 5 years old. But I was like, yeah, what the noise? I can eat it. Jeez, like, I'm not a fucking pariah, like, but
people don't know. They don't know.
But because it's polarized, right?
Yeah. Or they don't buy it, or and the polarization, especially, that's the perfect example. Like the vegans versus the paleo people, right? Like they're both, and you know what? That's not true, because you're an example of someone who was a vegetarian, and now you recognize, right, that where you can introduce things. But there are those, if you're defined as one of those things, you probably have really strong opinions about what the other person is doing wrong, right? And it's fascinating to me. Literally this morning, I was I had this injury happen to me this week, right? Where I don't even know how I got it. I think my dog probably ran into me. I got this bruise on my leg, and then I went skiing, and then the bruise just like expanded on my leg. And I went to the doctor yesterday because I'm like, do I have some weird infection or something? And basically what she told me is, you're old and you don't have as much collagen in you anymore, and your bruises are just bigger. And I'm like, what? Right? So I started looking into, like, this is what we do, right? There's a problem, we need a solution. So I start looking into collagen sources, and I'm looking into it, and I'm reaching out to people, and I'm looking at it, and I'm like, okay, there's all this testimony about this product and that product. And of course I'm looking at the ingredients. I'm like, how is it flavored? What does this mean from an intuitive level? If I'm drinking something that tastes like grape juice, but it's giving me all this protein, it's kind of like the chocolate steak syndrome thing, right? And I'm like, so what, like, I always try to go back to like how we were built, right? When a human was created, no matter how you believe a human was created, there's these tools, right? There's these things that we're given. And I'm like, okay, so now we've gotten to a place where there is some vanity in collagen, right? So although I'm using the bruise as my excuse, I'm like, okay, if I'm going to be on camera, it might be good to kind of like loosen up some of the wrinkles or whatever, right? And there's no way in hell I'm doing Botox. So it's like, anyway, I'm kind of rambling. But my point is that if you go back to, okay, right now, we're sourcing this collagen, has to be sourced from animals. So it's either fish or, some of the more cleaner ones are looking at, grass-fed beef, and it's hides or it's bones or it's skin. And this is where collagen is formed, right? This is what it is in our bodies. So it's like, well, do we really need to be ingesting collagen from an outside source? Shouldn't we be like looking at the nutrition that builds our own, right? It's kind of like when we talked about that episode about the kelp, right?
Omega-3.
The omega-3s, right? The fish, we're harvesting all these fish out of the ocean to get the omega-3s, because again, it's the same thing as the collagen. But it's like the fish are getting it from somewhere else. And if like an animal is built to produce collagen, we are animals, we do produce our own collagen. Instead of like harvesting, this excessive collagen, why aren't we asking, well, how could I produce more of my own collagen, right? Like, so there's just all these different conversations around it. And so then I'm like, okay, well, what does collagen taste like? And what kind of episode do I need to do around the flavor of collagen, right? Like, this is where my brain goes with all of this. But we're always looking for that quick solution, right? Instead of asking why. And that's how we got where we got. in everything around food, right?
Okay, so yeah, so paint the landscape, and then and then we'll kind of here. Let's go deep dive here. Paint the landscape. Where are we right now with food? Like, where are we at? What is I'm gonna ask maybe an ignorant question. What is the truth? Like, where are we at? Break it down.
Um, you know, the truth is that we are in a place that we as a society have kind of asked for. And that sounds awful. And there's this part of me that just feels like that's just a big stinger, because a lot of it happened without us really having an awareness of it, right? The shift in agriculture, the separation of animals and plants and farming communities, for this, all in the name of, we need to feed the world. This is a better way to feed the world. We can genetically modify things and, make plants bigger, stronger, faster, like bionic plants, right? And that way we can feed more people. There was like this pseudo solution to feeding people, to getting food to a place where it can be grown and then shipped across the country, right? All these things that have met a demand without us understanding the true consequences of what was happening on the other side. That being, farmers have shifted into this commercialized, required way of growing things, so that they can, I don't know, thrive is probably not even the right word. Farmers are suffering. They're suffering health-wise. They're suffering. Their lands are being, there's no nutrition in our soil anymore. So the food is struggling to grow with nutrition. There's no biodiversity. That's the key. Is biodiversity is just being stripped from our lands, and our food is changing, and our policies support, our governmental policies and our the marketing of our food and our health system, right? We're not talking about how to build our immune system to protect us from COVID. We're just talking about when's the vaccine coming out, right? So it's like nobody's looking at the huge regenerative biodiverse solution. And I believe that connection goes to flavor. And this is this conversation, right? And I always use the analysis of the the grocery store tomato and the backyard tomato, the difference in flavor. And everybody can talk about the conversation around flavor as its own entity has been happening for decades.
But again, this is where we get the divide, right? One person goes, because it tastes good,
Right.
But they don't. But like I found over the years that the more I've moved away from processed foods and salty foods, and then this past year of Corona has been a gift, because I mean, not a gift. I don't mean a gift.
Well, there's
but
lots of gifts in the last year. Yeah.
in this aspect, there was one of the gifts, I should say, one of the gifts of this past year of quarantining and all that, and isolation, uh, amidst losing a bunch of hair on my head, was not going to restaurants, which I know is not helpful to chefs and things like that. But for me, it taught me to cook the way that I want to cook. And I'm like, if I go for out or something and I stop at Chipotle or something, then I'm like, oh my God, this is salty. Like, this is not what I'm used to. And this is what I was taught. And then this set the standard for me, right? So the notion of, because it tastes good, that's like what you're saying. Like, someone else is putting on my plate what they think tastes good, or what they think I should think tastes good, right?
Well, and that's such a great reflection too, because when we are in this fast-paced world and we're eating out more often, and we're, and just taking advantage of the convenience of this food, right? Like Chipotle to me is actually one of the, the higher end as far as sourcing ingredients and giving messages out there about, sustainability and things. But the other thing that restaurants have to do is they have to meet the demand of what people think tastes good. And because we've been so inundated with salty and sweet from, across the board standpoint, and no one is educating anyone on how you actually can enjoy bitter and sour and umami as well. Nobody talks about the other flavors. We just lean into salty and sweet. And because that's the only thing we know as flavor, that's what's being demanded, right? That's what almost becomes required, especially in a situation like a chain restaurant, right? I'm assuming they're beyond national. I don't know if they're outside of the country or not, but a national chain has to meet the demands of the flavor that people want. So until you step back and go, okay, now I understand flavor, I'm playing with my own ingredients, I'm putting my own things together, without even knowing it, you're probably making your palate more interesting, right? And you don't need to do salt. You don't need salt to do that. So then when you go back and you step into the stuff that you used to like, you're like, wow, this is crazy. And that's your taste buds changing too, which is another whole part of this messaging, right? Is our bodies are talking to us. So if you're eating like processed sweet and your body keeps craving processed sweet and you just can never satisfy that, it's because there's something else your body's looking for. And then your taste buds are going to just keep, adapting, and sweetness is not going to taste sweet anymore. It's like this never ending cycle of not listening to putting real nutrition in your body, right? Like craving sweetness, you're not craving a processed chocolate chip cookie. You're actually craving like an apple, right? Something that's giving you the whole picture and not just the sweetness factor.
It's so true. Like the other day I got and I never do this, but like I don't know why I did this, but the other day I got my daughter Mike and Ike's because we were talking about them, and again, I mean she's a kid. Like I get that she's gonna be a cut. Like I don't want to be the one that, because she always says to me like, "Oh, Dada, this is made of sugar. This has a lot of sugar in it." Like she's waiting for me to scold her, and I'm like, bro, like you do you. Like like you're gonna go to birthday parties when the world comes back to normal and whatever. Like those are the
Right.
worst. Domino's pizza and fucking
Right.
cake and can. And I'm sitting there like in juice boxes. She's like, "Can I have a juice box?" And yeah, like, no, you can't in front of all these
Right,
parents.
right,
I'm saying
right.
no. But so I bought her Mike and Ike's the other day because we were talking about it. She didn't ask for it. I just brought it. I thought, hey, like I want
Yeah,
you to
I
try these.
mean, complete denial of children, like of anything sweet. Again, it's there's balance in all of it. But finish your
For sure,
story.
yeah. Like but I caught myself going, I used to love these because I'm telling her how much I used to love these, and at no point was I like, man, oh man, I could have one of these right now.
So
I could have one.
this is the thing about candy too. Like it has changed ingredients. Like it could be that when Mike and Ike's were first developed, maybe they did have, an element of real fruit juice in it, right? Like when we were kids, I can tell
Yeah,
you for sure, like Reese's peanut butter cups has changed, right? Everything is just the flavor is being extracted because the ingredients are different. They're
yeah,
still, recreating the texture, and there's an element to um, the flavor aspect. But if you could recreate the flavor of peanut butter with something called a natural flavor and then just put the texture of peanut butter in something that's not really peanuts, I'm not saying that that's what Reese's is doing, but the thinking behind it, there's so much food science that allows us to kind of recreate the experience of a peanut butter without actually having it be pure peanut butter. But we as consumers, we don't read ingredients and we're not worried about it. And we eat a Reese's peanut butter cup that used to be like our favorite thing in the whole wide world. And you just go, I don't love it as much.
See, but see that's where like again, like life gave me a lot of gifts where I had anxiety, depression, all these things, and triggered by dairy and gluten, and great contents or great amounts of sugar. And so like to me, like I do, as you're saying, I'm like I do feel like there's like this. Now I have a Pavlovian response, which is that I felt like I'm much more leveled, believe it or not, much more leveled. And I know that if I have like 2 years ago, after a year of taking a year off of dairy. Was that grammatically correct? A year after taking a year, it doesn't matter.
Sure, why
I
not?
took a year off of dairy and then I tried having dairy. I had a pizza. I had a slice of pizza, and literally my head started shaking. And then the next day, I had a dip in serotonin and something, and oh my god, I was laughing because I was like, this is painful depression.
Wow.
Like I remember, or if I had yogurt, like Greek yogurt, I tried like a few weeks later to see if it's really a thing. I was like, oh, let me see what's going on. I had Greek yogurt at like 4 o'clock on a Tuesday, let's say. Wednesday morning, like those like rides where you're like they drop you, It
Yeah.
was like a drop, a dip. So I'm thinking now of like, well, I wouldn't touch the Myconex because I know that there's going to be a reaction that is so violent that is not necessary. But when I was accustomed to it, when I was eating it, when I was bombarding my system with all the shit, I didn't notice how miserable I was. Like I
Right.
didn't
And
know.
that's the thing. You don't know how much better you can feel until you feel better. And until you start really listening and tuning in to how your body is really responding to things, like the fact that you have that drastic drop, and I'm sorry you experienced that because I'm sure that's hard, but at the same time, That's a clear message, right? That is absolutely, and you tested it, like you tested it multiple times. So, and then you can reflect back and be like, wow, now that I think about it, back when I let go of dairy, I didn't even notice. Like you almost don't even notice the improvement until you go back, right? And you're like, oh my God, this is crazy. And these are the things that we're just not taught. We have to kind of almost have somebody get in your face and say, well, did you ever think about not eating red dye number 40? Like, and you and inevitably, anytime anybody, and I did this too, like the first time I was told, when I did an elimination diet to try to figure out what was going on with my immune system, and I was told all the things that I couldn't eat, I was like, you've got to be kidding me. Like, who eats like this? Right. And again, like there's this part of me that it's like, this is another story, right? This is another food story. These elevations of food allergies, these elevations of autoimmune diseases, it parallels what has happened to our food. Yet carrying that conversation and having that conversation be anything but, hey, let's plot these lines and look where these things, like you can do that, but there's no science that's studying how, putting pesticides in your corn and then eating it every single day is also designed to affect the insect, and now you're putting it in your body, and weird, the same thing's happening in your body. That's really weird. But it's completely safe, so how could that be a thing, right? Like there's so much to the parallel of what's happening to our food and our planet and the soils. And I know I kind of went off on a little tangent there, but
No, this is huge.
it's a thing, and we're not taught how to listen to our body. That's what I was getting back to, right? Is we just trust. We trust that the way our food is being put on our plates, that it's safe, right? It's like trusting that the drug your doctor is going to give you is going to be safe. We watch Family Feud every once in a while. And if you ever want to see what the latest and greatest drugs are, just watch an episode of Family Feud, because every single commercial is like the latest drug. And then if it's not the drug commercial, the next commercial is the lawyers. Have you been injured by taking this drug 10 years ago, right? So you're like, it's safe. 20 years from now, you're going to look back and be like, well, that wasn't safe. And so there's no trust. There's a lack of trust factor in the people that are deciding what's good for us. For me, anyway.
Right. I was gonna say, because I know so many times that I hear from people where they want to watch, like any of the documentaries on, what like Forks Over Knives,
Right.
or Fat, Sick, and Nearly Dead, or like
Right.
what are the big ones, like the
Yeah,
Food
those are big ones.
Nation, right? They want to watch it with their husbands or spouses or whatever, right? And then the spouse goes, I don't care. I don't care what's in my food. I don't want to watch
Yeah.
documentaries about how poor how poorly run the meat factories are, and the meat packing industry is, and how corrupt. And I don't want to hear about McDonald's this or that or whatever. Like I eat it because it fucking tastes good.
And it's uncomfortable to hear all that stuff.
Because it's
and
what
you don't want. Yeah, and if it's gonna affect like your daily routine and your ease of life, and that's a thing, right? And yeah, it's hard to do this, but you have to let go of judgment around that, because they're just not there. They're just not there. They've got their own things in their own life that they're trying to, navigate. But that doesn't mean it's not concerning. Just because some people don't want to turn a blind eye. It's like every other atrocity. You could say the same thing about people that don't want to look at the Black Lives Matter movement, or don't want to look at, the U2 movement. There's so many things that are just uncomfortable. But you're right? Like there's.
And how do you start? Because you do a really good job of talking about this, and I think, and this is really this is the point, right? This is the core, is that you've done the research, you've seen both sides, and I think you're very, you talk about the banana man, which is kind of the representation of the food scientist who, like you always say, is pointing a banana at you, being
Right.
like, this is real, or like a processed bananas, or the banana man being the voice of all the chemical things, all the processed things, and then it's good for you, take it, health halo, right? It's like a health halo. How do you start shifting and start introducing incrementally better choices, healthier choices, living flavor choices, things that are going to be like the collagen, like things that will inspire your immune system to grow and
Right.
develop? And how do you start doing that if if you're either overwhelmed with like, oh my God, I don't even know where to start. It sounds like water is not good anymore. You know, the
Right.
people that sell the
That's
Kangen
true,
water.
actually.
Do you ever meet someone that sells Kangen water, the
Oh
water
yeah.
filters?
Oh yeah.
Like,
I've been down that rabbit hole too.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
easy to get. They're like, water's bad, and you're like, well, I need water. Like, I don't know.
It's true. But there's truth to it too. Like
Yeah.
it's definitely one of those things you're like, wow, I had no idea, right?
But
It's
it
another
can
one
be
of those things that
fatiguing.
change.
It
Oh, it
could be
is.
like, like it can paralyze you, right? You're
No
like,
doubt.
so how do you start? What's the first step you can take to start getting better at this thing and just start making healthier choices or more organic choices, literally?
Yeah. For me, and this is for any change in any aspect of anyone's life, is it starts with awareness. And because I'm bringing this out, through this language of flavor, you know, I always tell people the very first place to start and the easiest place to start is to just try to introduce and recognize the 5 categories of flavor, right? And start to look for them. So beyond salty and sweet, we all know what salty and sweet taste like, but we as human beings are born to experience also sour, also bitter, and also umami. Most people don't even know what umami is, and it's just the flavor of protein. I mean, it would be the flavor of collagen if collagen had a flavor. But these are categories of flavor, right? And it's a little bit hard because without all of your senses and without your olfactory also kicking in, when your olfactory kicks in and you distinguish a flavor, like the difference between a sour grapefruit and a sour lemon become evident, right? So you can pick up on those nuances, but you can still say in general that they're both sour, right? So it's that level, that sour level of awareness that I think people need to start by recognizing it. Just start by when you eat a piece of lettuce by itself, it's got a bitter element to it, right? When you eat a carrot is sweet, but it's also a little bitter, right? When you bite into an apple, you think an apple is sweet, so you take a bite and it's sweet, but if you really pay attention, the outside of it is bitter. So in nature, if you're eating something, and this is what we do as humans, we bring science into something and we discover something like a calorie, and then we extract it and we create all these stories around what a calorie is, but we're not looking at a piece of food as a whole and all the different flavors and all the different nutrients and the biodiversity of that apple. That is a complete process in our body, as opposed to, oh my God, there's calories in an apple, I can't eat that, right? Like, this is where we go in our brains because we're always looking for wisdom. So this is a really long-winded answer to your question, but to start by
It's okay because it's forgiving me for my obsession with guacamole that I make at home. So yes, this is good.
no, guacamole make it home is awesome. Um, it's this awareness of the other flavors. So sour and protein and bitter flavors, start to lean into them more, start to experiment with them more. People are always like, well, how can I bring more bitter into my life? Well, the easiest way to do that is with spices or teas. Like if you're, spices that don't have natural flavors in them, right? They aren't like some prepackaged mix with MSG, because you have to be careful of that stuff too, right? There's always added something without any kind of flavor additive, like pure cinnamon, pure basil, pure oregano, right? If you get a blend, make sure it's a reputable source that is blending them
Like
together.
like
But
McCormick, right? That's a reputable source. The ones you
I
get.
don't know.
I'm
I
just
can't call out anybody.
I'm just joking. That's the one that you
I mean,
get.
the ingredients. It's really the ingredients, right? Like,
Yeah.
without calling out companies, you have to just be very careful of your ingredients. If it's anything that's not a spice, don't buy it. But those are, there's healing elements to herbs. Just ask any herbalist. When I was doing Legendary Spice and creating spice blends, it was based on the concept of what we're selling in capsules as a supplement that was originally meant to be, a flavor on our food. And ever since then, I'm like, why aren't we just experiencing this flavor and letting our taste buds be like, wow, like, it's more exciting. It's more like, turmeric is a classic example of that. There was this, and I think it's still a thing, right? People still talk about the huge health benefits of turmeric. But like, if you were like, oh, well, my best friend just told me turmeric's good for me, so when I went out and bought a jar of it and put it on my spaghetti and it tastes like shit, right? It's like, you don't just take turmeric and dump it on things. Like, it's got to be mixed with other flavors because it tastes bitter. It's medicinal. It tastes bitter. There's a lot of power in it. You have to balance it with other flavors to be palatable. And guess what? When you balance it with other flavors, like, the cumin or the pepper or the spices or the coconut and the stuff that might go into like an Indian curry mix, you're also getting other flavors and other nutrition that help support that, right? So we're always on this, like, let's find one solution to one problem mission. And then when it comes to flavor, the solution is in diversity on your plate, growing it in biodiverse soils. Like, everything is about diversity that ultimately supports the biodiversity of your own gut, right? Like,
I
it's
love that.
so clear.
Because it's the biodiversity of the gut that is the overriding principle here, right? Like the
Right.
biodiversity of the gut is what causes the healing. I mean, right? It all starts and stops from there, right? Back and forth. But something that you talk about that I really love, that it's like, I think for me, something that stopped diversity going into the gut, which I didn't realize until we talked about. So I do want to bring this up here, is textures. So you talked about papayas not being your jam, literally not being your jam,
Yeah.
not being your thing, right? For me, I talked about peppers, like green peppers specifically.
Right.
Something I can't get now in a chili where it's like cooked down. I'm totally fine with it. I don't think much about it. But if you gave me like even like a stuffed pepper, which is like a very Israeli thing. I mean, lots of cultures have it, but like Israeli, like stuffed everything, I guess, stuffed cabbage, stuffed pepper. Like stuffed pepper, I can't get down with. I'll eat the filling, but not the pepper.
I used to
And
do that as a kid.
yeah, I'm like almost 70, so like I should change that up, Like I'm closer to 70 than not. Not no offense to 70-year-olds, I'm just saying, right? Like, is there a way to override that brass tacks, like that, or to realize that it's sometimes, you're saying with turmeric and everything, totally. Sometimes it's not the flavor though, it's the texture. We have to
Oh,
own
for sure.
that as well, right? How do we
Yep.
play with that?
Yeah, that is a real thing. And that goes back to the awareness conversation too, because you have to think about, is it really the flavor that's offending you, or is it the texture? You know, I have so many stories around people that say, "Oh, I don't like that. I don't like the flavor of that." Well, why? Well, because it's like every time I chew it, it grows in my mouth. Well, that's not a flavor, that's a texture, right? Like, there's so much about texture. So there's ways to get around that too. And another good example of that is, and this is where chefs can come in and help with all this stuff too, because they get it. They get the breaking down of toughness. They get how to break down, how to tenderize meats, how to break down a kale salad. Like, kale salad is the classic example. Like, if you're going to take a whole leaf of kale and try to eat like a big leaf of kale, it's a whole different experience than if a chef took it and shredded it and chopped it and put all these other flavors with it, like nuts that help with the chewing side of things, or some fruit that might create like a little bit of a pop of flavor or something, right? Like, texture is a real thing. So when you're going down that awareness path and you're trying new flavors, you have to consider, where is the texture coming into this, and how you're leaning into it or leaning away from it. Because if it is hard to chew, because I think, as a society, we've definitely kind of gone down this path of, wanting things to be kind of pre-chewed for us. And we kind of do that. Like, we had that little steak episode, right? We didn't even talk about the texture, but that's part of what the marketing did. And that's part of what, like, grain-fed cattle that has all these veins of fat in it, all of a sudden a ribeye is like melt in your mouth, whereas like a grass-fed ribeye that has more flavor is harder to chew. So people don't like grass-fed steak because they say it doesn't taste as good, but it's not the taste. Well, I would assume it's not the taste, it's the texture. So what is it? What is it that you're offended by or like, and how can you change that, right? Shredding the kale is the perfect example. It's easier to chew shredded kale than it is big chunks of kale.
Oh, 100%. And then the kale chips, oh my God, forget about it. Where they're
Right. Then you
baked and
bake it
oh,
and you
it's so
just
good.
put some other seasoning on it, and it's all of a sudden kale is your favorite vegetable in the world, right?
Yeah. My co-parent, she does kale chips where it's literally that, where she like in true like her fashion, she massages the
Oh,
kale, like
and
does
that's
all that.
another way to make it tender, massaging the kale. Yeah.
Yeah, she
That's
like
awesome.
oh, it's so good, and then chopped up with like salt and like everything's like perfectly proportioned, and then she bakes it. And it's like, oh my God, heaven. Yeah. So then, but then there's one more thing I want to bring up, and then I'll leave you alone. I promise. Because we're getting all the literally all the juice. But another part of it though that we forget about a lot of times is smell, right? Like our mutual friend Dia Klein,
Mhm.
she had a story about Doritos, right? That she doesn't, because she's an anosmic, so she can't smell. She's never smelled anything in her life. She tastes, but she doesn't smell, right? So for her, Doritos are a very different experience, right?
Yes.
How
And
much does yeah, oh yeah, sorry.
yeah, I was gonna say I'm so excited. I can't wait to have her on the show too, because she's a rock star taster, right? So I loved when I first met her. She was like, people say that you can't taste if you can't smell. It's like, I can taste. And then like, the videos that she has of her doing taste tests with other people, like they're brilliant. And I almost felt like she kind of, it proves my existence, because she only experiences taste. She doesn't have the smell factor coming in. So she's not having the same tools that we have to distinguish the flavors. And yet she can identify things, right? So whether it's like the levels of those different categories, so she can taste those 5 categories of flavor. This is where I'm like, okay, that's what we need to talk about when it comes to nutrition, because if people that can't smell can still taste, there's still an element of being able to detect nutrition, right? And to me, that's just like, somebody should be shouting that at the rooftops, because it's still a thing. And I think this is what's happened with COVID, and everybody, like I've actually talked to people that have had COVID that lost their sense of taste and smell. And I'm like, okay, so did you really lose your sense of taste? Could you still taste coffee? Oh, I had to put all the sugar in my coffee to make it even taste good. Well, then you're tasting something. If you can taste the sugar that you're putting in your coffee, you're tasting, right? So there's just no information out there about the fact that even without our sense of smell, which we completely um, subconsciously connect to identifying food, right? We think we're tasting, but it's really smelling and tasting. And yet, even without that sense of smell, you can still taste. There's still cravings. I have 3 friends that are anosmics. She's the only congenital anosmic that I know. The other 2 were through injury. And one of them, she's very connected to the earth. She does a lot of work in, connections to nature. When I first started talking about that, she was like, Sherry, this is so huge. She's like, when you first lose your sense of smell, it's tragic. And there's very little support out there for it. There probably is more now because of COVID. But, you go into this depression because you can't experience this pleasurable flavor that you had before, the diversity of flavor you could experience. But in the long run, she now recognizes that her cravings for food are very aligned, right? It's almost like by taking that Dorito effect, there's a whole book, it's one of my favorite books in the world, called The Dorito Effect by Mark Schatzker. By taking out these mimicked flavors that are only targeting our sense of smell, you can tell there's no nutrition there. And that's what happens with Dia. She just gets this flat saltiness. I shouldn't speak for her, but this is how I remember it. There's no variety of flavor, because all of those flavors are geared to stimulate our sense of smell, which means there's no nutrition in them, right? She's not getting the variety. If she took a tomato and an onion and a pepper and all the things that are in salsa that Doritos are supposed to be flavored with, she could taste those things. But when it's all recreated and thrown onto a chip,
This
it's
is
not there, right? And
this
that's my
is
whole thing. That's my like
right.
flavor and nutrition. Like this is, if people are starting to challenge me, like, where's the science behind it? Well, there is no science behind it, because all of our science is pointing to the opposite direction, right?
But
So it's like common sense.
but it's so funny you're saying it's common sense. The big takeaway that I'm getting from this episode here is that the point of taste is, I mean, you said it, so like what I'm getting, like what I'm hearing is the point of taste is to detect nutrition. I'm gonna say the point of taste is to detect nutrition. If there's no nutrition, we don't taste it. What's funny is, but this is like an example again, but like I've heard from people also who had COVID and got through it and everything, and they lost their sense of taste and smell, and they say, you think like, oh, great, I can't taste or smell, I'm just going to eat broccoli and Brussels sprouts all day, right? And they're like, it's not like that. Why is it not like that? Because there's still years of conditioning that tell
Right.
you that it doesn't taste good, or you don't like the texture or something, right?
Right.
So I guess like the takeaway again is that that's just not true. Like it's all about your taste buds are born to detect actual nutrition, which is there geared towards making you a healthier person.
That's what I'm saying. And I don't understand. I just don't see how anybody can prove me wrong. I'm sure
Nor should they. Well, and again, I should mention the show,
try.
the show that you do, you're not sitting there like you don't like you're not going, you are wrong for doing this, and it's not a show all about you will be unhealthy, you will die if you put another steak in your mouth. You're just explaining kind of both sides, and you're bringing in people and you're interviewing people on all sides of the argument, and you're just giving us literally, I keep saying literally, I keep saying literally, you're giving us this buffet of healthy options that are nutrition based. So where can people see the show?
So the show itself is on YouTube under the Flavor Remedy. You'll see the banner, Let's Talk Taste with Sherry. But the Flavor Remedy is the YouTube channel. And I'm on all the social media things. The Flavor Remedy is a Facebook page. The Flavor Remedy is an Instagram page. I'm posting things in LinkedIn. I'm kind of targeting LinkedIn because I want to get these. That's where I'm finding the regenerative soil communities and the farming communities and the people that are starting to tap into there is some science growing around the connection of flavor and nutrition in our soils, and that like excites the crap out of me. So I'm trying to kind of draw those people in, and so I'm kind of all over the place, but the best way to see the episodes is on my YouTube channel right now.
And I'll put a link to all those things under the thing here. So
thank you,
Sherry. Thank you. This was wonderful. And like, this was so helpful. I mean, I've been with you for a year now. Like, I get it, but like, I loved how we've just phrased it, where it's like, we broke down like the actual, what is actual flavor, what is smell, what is texture, and how you can challenge yourself and grow and expand your beliefs and your habits around those things. So bringing it back to the idea of like, it tastes good. Does it? Here are ways to really decide if it really does taste good for you.
It's kind of a cool trick, actually. Now that I think about it, you just brought it up. Does it really taste good? Hold your nose and taste it. Does it really taste good? That's a pretty good indicator, right?
Yep.
We need to get Dia on the show for sure.
I know, for sure. I'm excited for that day. Yeah. All right. Good job. You're the best. Virtual hug. Awesome work.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for being here.